As the water rippled gently, a young mermaid swam through the clear blue depths, her long shiny tail gliding effortlessly through the waves. She was exploring the waters near the edge of the coral reef when she suddenly saw something strange in the distance. At first, she thought it was just a shadow or a fish, but as she swam closer, her eyes widened in surprise. There, floating in the water, was a young boy. His dark hair was wet, and his skin shimmered under the sunlight that filtered through the water. His wide eyes were full of wonder, as if he had never seen such a beautiful world before. He didn't seem scared. Instead, he looked curious and amazed by everything around him. The mermaid's heart skipped a beat. She had never seen a human this close before, and certainly not one in the water. She swam closer, her movements graceful and silent. She could feel her heart racing with excitement. "Wow," she whispered to herself, her voice full of surprise. "Who do we have here?" She couldn't believe her eyes. A human boy. Right here in the water. As she circled around him, her eyes sparkled. "A very handsome boy," she said, her voice full of admiration. "Wow, this is really a human. I can't believe it." She was amazed by how calm and peaceful he looked, floating gently in the water. There was something about him, something that made her feel a warmth in her heart, a feeling she had never felt before. She couldn't stop smiling as she gazed at him. "I love this one," she whispered softly. It was as if the moment she saw him, she knew there was something special about him. She swam around him in circles, unable to take her eyes off him. "I would love to adopt him already," she said with a playful laugh, her voice full of affection. "I love him already." Her heart felt full, and a strange sense of protectiveness washed over her. She didn't know why, but she felt like this boy belonged in her world, in the beautiful underwater kingdom she called home. She imagined showing him all the wonders of the sea, introducing him to the other mermaids, and maybe even teaching him how to swim like they did. The boy, still floating and unaware of the mermaid's presence, gazed around in awe, completely captivated by the world beneath the water. He had never seen anything so beautiful, with a colorful fish swimming past and the coral glowing in soft hues. The mermaid smiled, thinking how perfect it would be to have him here with her. "I can already picture it," she thought to herself. "He will be part of our world. I'll show him everything. He'll be safe here with us in the water, where everything is peaceful and perfect." She felt an overwhelming sense of joy, like she had found something precious, someone precious. As the mermaid watched the boy, she couldn't help but feel excited about the future. There was no doubt in her heart. She knew that, somehow, this boy would be a part of her world forever. She couldn't wait to show him the magic of the sea and how beautiful life could be when shared with others. The thought of him becoming part of her underwater family made her heart swell with happiness, and she smiled to herself, imagining all the wonderful adventures they would have together. Ikuku land was a beautiful village, full of life and color. The land was green with thick grass and tall trees that reached for the sky. Everywhere you looked, there were flowers. Bright yellow sunflowers, red roses, purple lavender, and many more. The colors of the flowers made the village look like a painting, full of bright and happy shades. The fields around the village were wide and stretched out like a soft carpet, and the air smelled fresh like earth and flowers. The people of Ikuku were kind-hearted. They helped each other, shared what they had, and always smiled no matter what. It felt like everyone in the village was a part of one big family. They lived in peace with one another, working together and enjoying the simple joys of life. But Ikuku land had one big problem. There was no water. The rains didn't fall often, and when they did, they were weak and short. The rivers that once flowed through the land had dried up, leaving behind only dusty riverbeds. The land, once green and fertile, was now parched. The villagers couldn't grow crops or even have enough water to drink from their own land. They had no choice but to travel to the neighboring village, Aswama, to get water. The river in Aswama was famous. It was large and clear, and its waters were fresh and cool, perfect for drinking, cooking, and washing. But getting to Aswama was not easy. The journey was long and hard. The path was rocky, and the heat of the sun made the journey feel even longer. The villagers had to walk for hours, carrying large clay pots, baskets, and bundles of clothes, just to fill up on water. After they filled their pots, they had to carry them all the way back to Ikuku, which took even more time. It was tiring work, and it was something they had to do every single day. Despite the difficulty, the people of Ikuku didn't complain. They were used to the struggle and did their best to make the most of it. The walk to Aswama had become a part of their lives, and they did it with hope and strength. They knew they had to keep going if they wanted to survive. Among these villagers was Mrs. Okeke, a strong and caring mother. She had a young son named Obi. Obi was a curious boy, always asking questions and looking for answers about the world. Mrs. Okeke worked hard every day, and she often took Obi with her on the long journey to Aswama. Obi was still small, but he loved to help his mother. He carried small buckets of water for her and always tried to be useful, even though the walk was difficult for him. One sunny morning, Mrs. Okeke and Obi set out for Aswama, as they did every other day. They carried their clay pots, which were heavy but needed to be filled. Obi also had a bundle of dirty clothes in his hands, ready to wash them at the river while his mother filled the pots with water. The morning sun was already warm, and the sky was clear, with not a cloud in sight. The path to Aswama was beautiful, though the walk was long. The birds sang their songs in the trees above, and the leaves rustled in the breeze. The air was fresh and smelled of the earth. Obi skipped happily alongside his mother, looking around with wide eyes. "Mama," Obi asked, looking up at her with a curious expression, "why doesn't it rain here anymore?" Mrs. Okeke smiled gently at him but sighed softly. "Obi, sometimes the world is like that. The rain doesn't come the way it used to. But we are strong, my son, and we make do with what we have. We carry on because that's what we must do." Obi looked up at her, his small face thoughtful. Then he nodded slowly. He didn't fully understand, but he trusted his mother. He knew that if she said they could make do, then they would. When they finally reached the river in Aswama, Obi was excited to help. The river sparkled in the sunlight, its waters clear and cool. The air was filled with the sound of water splashing, and the laughter of the other villagers who were also there to wash clothes and fill their pots. The riverbanks were busy with people working together, washing their clothes and filling their large pots with water. Obi was small, but he did his best to help. He filled little buckets with water and carried them back and forth, trying to keep up with his mother. His face was bright with excitement and pride, even though he was tired. Mrs. Okeke worked steadily by the river's edge. She scrubbed the clothes on a flat stone, her hands moving quickly and skillfully. Every so often, she would look up at Obi with a loving smile, proud of him for his help. The sun glistened off the water, making everything around them seem to shine. The air was fresh and filled with the sound of water splashing and the soft chatter of the villagers. Despite the hard work, there was a sense of peace by the river. The villagers worked together, sharing stories and laughter as they went about their tasks. Obi felt happy, even though he was tired. He loved being with his mother, and he loved the river. It was their only source of water, but it was also a place where the village came together, where everyone worked side by side to help each other. As Obi helped his mother, he looked at the river with wonder. He knew the journey was hard, but in moments like this, it didn't seem so difficult. They were together, and that made everything feel a little bit easier. And so, even as the villagers of Ikuku land faced the heat of the sun and the tiring journey, they did so with hope in their hearts. They knew that no matter how hard it got, they would always find a way to make it through, because they were strong and they had each other. As Obi fetched water from the calm but wide Aswama River, something unusual caught his attention. Perched delicately on a low-hanging branch, a bird unlike any he had ever seen shimmered in the sunlight. Its feathers seemed to be made of pure magic, blending hues of deep sapphire, emerald green and fiery gold. Each time the bird moved, its wings sparkled as if dusted with tiny jewels. The bird's melodious tune floated through the air, as sweet as a flute, drawing Obi into a trance. "Mama, look at that bird," Obi exclaimed, pointing eagerly toward the mesmerizing creature. Mrs. Okeke glanced up briefly, her face a mix of amusement and impatience. "It's lovely, Obi," she acknowledged, her hands busy scrubbing a shirt against the washing stone. "But we don't have time for distractions. Focus on your work. The sun won't wait for us." Despite his mother's admonishment, Obi couldn't tear his eyes away. The bird tilted its head as if it were looking directly at him, its bright eyes sparkling with mischief. Obi's curiosity grew stronger with every passing second. Holding his bucket tightly in one hand, he took cautious steps toward the creature, the mud squelching softly under his bare feet. The bird let out another enchanting trill and hopped to another branch, just out of reach. It seemed to beckon Obi, inviting him to follow. Mesmerized, Obi moved closer, his heart pounding with a strange mix of excitement and wonder. The world around him faded, the chatter of villagers, the splash of water, even his mother's voice calling out faintly in the distance. All that mattered was the bird. The bird fluttered its wings and soared gracefully to a floating log in the middle of the river. Obi hesitated for a moment, glancing back at his mother, who was still focused on her task. Then, as if under a spell, he stepped into the water. The river was cool against his legs, the gentle current swirling around him as he waded deeper. The bird's melody grew softer, almost teasing as it waited for him on the log. "Obi, where are you going?" Mrs. Okeke's voice rang out, sharp with alarm. She had finally noticed her son venturing into the river. Dropping the clothes she was washing, she stood up, her heart pounding with fear. But Obi was too entranced to hear her. His focus remained on the bird, which now seemed to glow faintly in the afternoon light. He took another step, but the riverbed beneath his feet suddenly gave way. The ground slipped from under him, and the strong current pulled him forward. Panic set in as he flailed his arms, trying to keep his head above water. "Mama, help!" Obi's terrified scream pierced the air, shattering the spell that had held him. He struggled desperately, his small hands clawing at the water. Waves splashed around him as the river's grip tightened, dragging him further from the shore. Mrs. Okeke's heart dropped. "Obi, no!" she cried, running toward the edge of the river. She splashed into the water without hesitation, her skirts dragging heavily against her legs. But Obi was already too far out, the current carrying him deeper into the river's embrace. Obi's vision blurred as the world around him dissolved into a swirl of blue and white. His arms grew weaker, and the sounds of the river faded into a distant hum. Just as he began to sink completely, he caught a glimpse of the bird once more, its radiant form hovering above him. It let out one last haunting melody before everything went dark. Obi sank deeper into the river, his vision blurring as water filled his lungs. Just when he thought all hope was lost, he found himself in a strange, luminous world beneath the surface. The water around him sparkled like diamonds, and colorful coral formations surrounded him. A group of mermaids with shimmering tails and flowing hair swam gracefully towards him. They were adorned in vibrant shells and pearls, their faces a mix of surprise and curiosity. One of them, named Lily, gasped, "A human boy. How did he get here?" "He must have drowned," another mermaid said. "Should we send him back?" Lily swam closer and gently lifted Obi, who was barely conscious. "No, he's too weak. We'll take care of him first." Obi opened his eyes and gasped, coughing out water. Where am I?" he stammered. "You're in our kingdom," Lily replied softly. "We are mermaids. Don't be afraid. We won't harm you." Obi looked around in awe. "I've never seen anything like this. It's beautiful, but I need to go back to my mother. She'll be worried." Lily hesitated, then said, "We'll let you go back, but stay with us for a week. You'll be safe here, and I'll show you wonders you've never imagined." Back on the riverbank, Mrs. Okeke waited anxiously for Obi to return. The sun began to set, and a deep sense of dread filled her heart. She called out his name repeatedly, her voice echoing through the still air. When Obi didn't answer, she knew something was wrong. She rushed to the villagers for help. "Please, my son is missing. He was fetching water and fell into the river. We need to find him." The villagers gathered with torches and nets, combing the river and its surroundings. They searched tirelessly for 2 days, but there was no sign of Obi. Exhausted and heartbroken, Mrs. Okeke fell to her knees. "My son, where are you?" she sobbed. Her husband, Mr. Okeke, tried to comfort her. "We'll find him, my dear. Have faith." But Mrs. Okeke couldn't eat or sleep. Every day she returned to the river, crying and praying. "Please bring my son back to me," she pleaded. Her grief was so deep that even the villagers felt her pain. As the days passed, Obi slowly adjusted to the vibrant world beneath the waves. The mermaid kingdom was unlike anything he had ever imagined. An ethereal realm of shimmering coral reefs, swaying seaweed, and creatures that glowed with a soft, otherworldly light. The water was clear and warm, and Obi could breathe as easily as he had above the surface, thanks to the magic of the mermaids. Lily, the kind-hearted mermaid, became his guide, introducing him to the wonders of her world. She fed him delicious meals, fish that tasted like the sun, seaweed that melted on his tongue, and fruits that seemed to glow with the essence of the ocean itself. Each day was a new adventure, from exploring underwater caves filled with glowing gems to swimming through schools of sparkling fish. But what Obi cherished most were the evenings, when the mermaids would gather around him, their iridescent tails flicking in the gentle currents. They were always eager to hear stories about the human world, their wide eyes filled with curiosity. "Tell us about your home, Obi," one of them asked, her voice like the song of a distant wave. Obi smiled, his heart swelling with both warmth and sadness as he began to speak. "My village is small, nestled near a river. The days are long, filled with hard work, especially when we need to fetch water from the faraway well. But there's a joy in that too. The laughter of children, the sound of women singing as they work, and the kindness of the people who live there." The mermaids listened intently, hanging on to every word. Their faces lit up with wonder as Obi described the simple beauty of his world, the smells of fresh bread baking in the morning sun, the sight of the stars on a clear night, and the feeling of the earth beneath his feet. "It sounds so different from here," Lily mused, her voice thoughtful as she twirled a lock of seaweed around her finger. "But you're special, Obi. I'm glad you're here." Obi's heart clenched at the thought of his mother. He smiled but felt a deep ache within him, a longing that refused to be silenced. "I'll always remember this place," he said softly, "but I need to return to my family. I can't stay here forever." Lily's eyes darkened for a moment, a flicker of sadness crossing her face. "I understand," she said quietly, her voice barely a whisper against the sounds of the ocean. "But wherever you go, remember that you will always have a home here." The 7th day arrived, bringing with it a bittersweet sense of finality. The mermaids had prepared a grand feast, the water alive with color and light as they swam gracefully around the glowing coral tables. Exotic fruits from the deepest parts of the sea glistened like jewels, and delicacies from distant underwater kingdoms were arranged in delicate patterns. Lily, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, approached Obi with a small chest in her hands. "These are for you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Take these as a token of our friendship, a symbol of the bond we share." The chest contained precious jewels, pearls that shone like the moon, opal stones that shifted colors with the light, and tiny sea creatures preserved in glass orbs. "Thank you," Obi said, his throat tight with the weight of his emotions. He took the chest from her, holding it gently as if it contained not just the treasures of the sea, but a piece of his heart. Lily reached out and hugged him, her arms wrapping around him tightly, her voice barely audible. "I'll miss you, Obi. You'll always have a place here, no matter where you go." "I'll never forget you," Obi whispered, his voice thick with the lump in his throat. He kissed her forehead softly, the warmth of their embrace lingering in his chest. The mermaids led Obi to the surface, their silvery tails gliding through the water with grace. As they approached the riverbank, Obi could see the familiar shape of his mother, kneeling by the water's edge. Her figure was small against the vast landscape, her head bowed in silent grief. "Mama," Obi called out, his heart racing as he swam toward her. His limbs tired but filled with hope. The water parted around him as he reached the surface, and the moment their eyes met, his mother's face broke into a mixture of disbelief and overwhelming joy. "Obi, my son," Mrs. Okeke gasped, her voice shaking as she reached out to him. Tears streamed down her face, her hands trembling as they wrapped around him. "I thought I lost you," she sobbed, her voice breaking with the weight of the years they had spent apart. Obi held her tightly, the feeling of her arms around him a balm to the aching emptiness he had carried in his heart. "I'm here, Mama. I'm home." As they embraced, the world seemed to pause. The river, the mermaids, the ocean itself, all fading into the background as mother and son were reunited at last. When Obi and his mother returned home after their long journey to Aswama, Obi couldn't wait to tell his mother all about his amazing adventure in the Mermaid Kingdom. His eyes were shining with excitement as he rushed into the house, his heart pounding with the need to share everything that had happened. He had seen mermaids, swam with them, and even received special gifts from them. His story was so full of wonder that it was hard to keep it all inside. "Mama," Obi said, barely able to catch his breath, "you won't believe what happened. I saw mermaids, real mermaids. They live under the water in a beautiful kingdom. They gave me gifts, gold, diamonds, and even necklaces. I swam with them, Mama, it was amazing." Mrs. Okeke looked at him, her face a mixture of confusion and disbelief. She put down the basket she had been carrying and sat down slowly, folding her hands in her lap. She loved her son with all her heart, but this was hard to believe. "Obi," she said gently, shaking her head, "there's no such thing as mermaids. They are just stories people tell. You must have imagined it or maybe dreamt it. Are you sure it wasn't just your imagination?" Obi's face fell for a moment, but then he remembered the gifts, the glittering diamonds and the shining gold. His heart swelled with excitement, and he ran to get them. He returned with a small bag that he had kept safe, carefully tucked away. Inside were the gifts the mermaids had given him, each one glowing with a special light. He opened the bag and showed them to his mother. Sparkling diamonds, golden necklaces, and tiny silver ornaments that looked like nothing Mrs. Okeke had ever seen before. When Mrs. Okeke saw the gifts, her eyes widened in shock. She reached out slowly, touching one of the diamonds. It was real, colder than she expected, and it sparkled in the light. Her hands trembled as she picked it up, her breath catching in her throat. "Obi," she whispered, almost unable to speak. "Where did you get these?" Obi stood tall, his eyes full of confidence. "From Lily and her friends," he said, his voice firm. "They're mermaids. They live under the sea, and they gave me these as a goodbye gift." For a moment, Mrs. Okeke didn't know what to say. She stared at the diamonds and the gold, feeling the weight of them in her hands. These weren't simple trinkets or toys. They were real treasures. The kind of treasures that people would travel the world for. The kind that no ordinary person could easily get. "Mama, I'm telling you the truth," Obi insisted, his voice full of hope. "I wasn't dreaming. Lily showed me their kingdom. It was beautiful, like nothing I've ever seen before. The water was clear, and the fish were so bright, they looked like they were glowing. The mermaids were kind. They helped me, and they gave me these gifts because I'm special." Mrs. Okeke sat back, her mind racing. She looked at her son, his eyes filled with honesty and innocence. She had always known that Obi had a special heart. He had always been kind and caring, always seeing the good in people. But mermaids, a kingdom under the sea. She couldn't deny the proof in her hands. The diamonds sparkled like little stars, and the gold shimmered, catching the light from the window. She had seen precious things before, but never anything like this. Maybe it's true," she whispered to herself. She still couldn't quite believe it, But the evidence in front of her was undeniable. Obi wasn't making this up. He had something real, something she couldn't explain. At that moment, Obi's father, Mr. Okeke, walked into the room. He was a tall man, his face serious, but his eyes softened when he saw the gifts. Obi rushed over to him, eager to show his father what he had brought back from the Mermaid Kingdom. "Papa, look at what I got from the mermaids. They gave me these as a goodbye gift," Obi said excitedly. Mr. Okeke took the diamond in his hand, turning it over carefully, inspecting it as if he couldn't believe his eyes. He held it up to the sunlight, and it sparkled, sending tiny rainbows across the room. He looked at Obi, then back at the treasure in his hand. His voice was low, full of disbelief. "These are real. These are not things you just find in the dirt or buy from a market. Where did you really get these, Obi?" Obi's heart raced. His father's words made him feel both proud and nervous. He wanted them to believe him, to know the truth of what he had experienced. "I told you, Papa," Obi said, his voice a little quieter now. "I got them from Lily and her friends, the mermaids. They gave them to me because I helped them. I swam with them, and they wanted to thank me." Mr. Okeke looked at his son, his brow furrowed, trying to understand. He had always known Obi to be a smart and honest boy. But mermaids, a kingdom underwater, it was hard to grasp. "I don't know what to say," Mr. Okeke finally said, his voice filled with awe. "This is unbelievable." The room fell silent. Obi looked at his parents, hoping they would believe him. Mrs. Okeke looked at her husband, her face full of wonder and worry. She still wasn't sure, but she couldn't ignore the evidence. These gifts were not ordinary. They were precious, real. And if Obi had truly received them from mermaids, then his adventure was more than just a story. It was something magical, something that could change everything. Obi smiled, relieved that his parents were listening, even if they didn't fully understand yet. He was glad to share his story with them, to show them that sometimes incredible things could happen. Things that couldn't be explained, things that were beyond belief. But for now, as they sat together in the quiet of their home, surrounded by the shimmering treasures, Obi knew one thing for sure. He would never forget the Mermaid Kingdom, and he would always carry the magic of that world with him, no matter where life took him next. The story of Obi's miraculous return and the dazzling treasures he brought with him spread like wildfire through Ikuku. Within hours, curious villagers began streaming toward the Okeke household. The modest home buzzed with excitement, filled with whispers of wonder and skepticism. "Did you hear? Obi went to the land of mermaids," one villager exclaimed, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Nonsense," another retorted. "But what about the jewels? They say they're real." As the crowd gathered, Mrs. Okeke carefully displayed the treasures on a woven mat. The jewels sparkled brilliantly in the sunlight, their colors ranging from deep crimson rubies to pale blue sapphires. Gasps of astonishment rippled through the onlookers. "Where did you get these, Obi?" an elderly man asked, his voice trembling. Obi stood tall, his face glowing with confidence. "From the mermaids," he declared. "They live in the river, in a world so beautiful it's like a dream." Though some remained doubtful, the undeniable beauty and value of the jewels silenced the skeptics. Whispers turned into cheers, and Obi's story quickly became a legend. Meanwhile, Mr. and Mrs. Okeke deliberated on what to do with their newfound fortune. After much discussion, they decided to use a portion of the wealth to transform the village. The first project was to build a massive water reservoir, a solution to the community's long-standing struggle with drought. It had been weeks since Obi came back from the underwater kingdom, and things were not the same. He wasn't himself anymore. He refused to go to school, help at home, or even play with the other children in the village. One morning, his mother, Mrs. Okeke, walked into his room and found him sitting by the window, staring at nothing. "Obi, my son," she said gently. "What is wrong? You've been acting strangely since you returned. Talk to me." Obi turned to her, tears in his eyes. "Mama, I miss Lily and her friends. They were so kind to me. Life in the mermaid kingdom is different. Feels like home there. I want to go back. Mrs. Okeke gasped. Obi, what are you saying? This is your home. We are your family. Obi shook his head slowly. I love you and Papa, but I don't think I belong here. My heart is with the mermaids. I belong to the water. Obi's strange behavior continued. He stayed indoors all day, barely spoke, and refused to eat. His parents, Mr. and Mrs. Okeke, grew more worried with each passing day. Obi, his father pleaded one evening, "You are our only child. You are our precious jewel. What will happen to us if you leave? We need you here." "I love you too, Papa," Obi said weakly. "But staying here is making me sick. I need to go back to the water." On the third day, Obi's condition worsened. His body burned with fever, and he could barely get out of bed. His parents were beside themselves with worry. "We can't let him die," Mrs. Okeke cried. "We have to do something fast." Desperate, they went to a herbalist in the neighboring village. The herbalist was an old man with a long gray beard. He listened carefully as they explained Obi's strange illness. After a long pause, the herbalist spoke. "I am sorry to tell you this, but Obi is not like other children. He is a water child. He belongs to the river. If you don't let him return, you may lose him forever." Mrs. Okeke burst into tears. "What are we supposed to do? He's our only child. We can't lose him." "You have a choice," the herbalist said calmly. "Let him go and he will live. Or keep him here, and his illness will only get worse." When they got home, Obi was lying on his bed, looking pale and weak. His parents sat by his side. "Obi," his mother said, holding his hand, "we love you more than anything in the world. If going back to the river will make you happy, then we will let you go." Obi's eyes lit up for the first time in days. "Really, Mama? Papa? Thank you. I promise I will visit and bring you gifts." The next morning they took Obi to the river. He hugged them tightly and said, "I'll never forget you. I'll always love you." Then he stepped into the water. The river sparkled as if welcoming him home. When Obi arrived in the mermaid kingdom, Lily and her friends were overjoyed. "Obi is back," they cheered. They threw a grand feast with music and dancing. For the first time in weeks, Obi felt truly happy again. Back in the village, Mr. and Mrs. Okeke missed their son deeply, but they took comfort in his promise to visit. True to his word, Obi returned occasionally, bringing gold, silver, and beautiful ornaments from the underwater kingdom. With the treasures Obi brought, the Okekes built a grand mansion and became the richest family in the village. They used their wealth to help others and were loved by everyone. Though Obi lived in the mermaid kingdom, he never forgot his parents, and every time he visited, he reminded them, "I will always love you, no matter where I am." Mr. and Mrs. Okeke looked at their son with pride and love, knowing that even though he belonged to the water, he would always be their precious Obi.